We are doing a deep dive into
Sex and the City.
the lifestyle was so unaffordable.
She's getting paid around $1,000 a column.
People are thinking, actually, maybe I should have a man as a financial plan.
People cannot agree on this.
Welcome to Help Me I'm Poor, the money podcast that's more Stanford Blatch than cold hard cash. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire, and each week we discuss how money shows up in our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary.
We are doing a deep dive into probably the most requested show in our inbox over the first season, which is
Sex and the City. Oh, I'm so happy that we're doing this. All along when we were planning season 2, we were like, we've got to do a Sex and the City episode. And then the more we thought about it and looked into it, the more we were like, this has to be sort of a series in its own right, or like a mini series. So we're going to do one for each series, one for the movie/movie one, because we're not sure if we want to acknowledge movie 2.
TBC.
TBC, although it might be interesting to talk a bit about why so many people are upping sticks to the Middle East.
Yeah.
But yeah, so TBC, and then we're going to do an And Just Like That episode, which I'm quite excited for, not least because I've got quite a lot of things to get off my chest.
Yes, so we're going to kick off today with looking at season 1 and really actually just like setting the scene, looking at the economics of Sex and the City and the icon that is Carrie Bradshaw.
I guess before we get started, I'm so interested to know what your relationship is with this show, because I have such a strong origin story with this show. It was really like my first experience of looking at like adult relationships and what it could look like to be a woman in your 30s, and watching it at like 15, 16 is very different to watching it now that I am actually the same age as a lot of the characters are towards the end. And obviously we can talk about how realistic the portrayal of these characters is, but it felt so like glamorous and so aspirational. And also I do think that it was like good for my attitude towards sex and relationships as a teenager, potentially not so good as like an informant of how the world of money works.
It's the glamour, isn't it, that is what got me into it. I was listening to an interview on Sentimental Garbage where it was Caroline was talking to Dolly Alderton about Sex and the City, and they said in it, you know, like the 5th character, some people say is money, but actually they think it's New York City, and I'm with them on that. I think that for me, it, along with Gossip Girl, which we talked about last season, like it really kind of set this kind of fire in me for like this being the city where everything happens. It's the city where, you know, dreams come true. And I know like a lot of people still feel like that. I still love it. And it's just so iconic, and it's portrayed as being this place where you can live like this glamorous, like desirable life. And I think that's kind of how I thought my 30s might be.
Yeah, and I think the really important thing is we don't necessarily know that much about the characters' backstories, but we do know that none of them are native New Yorkers. They've kind of been dropped into this city to live this period of their lives where it's really exciting. They're always out, they're always meeting new people. It's obviously kind of pre-internet, especially at the start. So
well, it's 1998, isn't it, when the first season was out? So I don't even know when we probably got internet, but I'm pretty sure that like my dial-up internet was only just like in the early 2000s, maybe.
Absolutely, and that it definitely wasn't a thing where like the internet came with you.
No.
So there's so many of these like human interactions. And I do agree that like New York is definitely the 5th character in the city as a backdrop, plays such a huge role in loads of the storylines. But I also think that if we're looking at kind of like sex and love and relationships being like the main theme of the show, then money comes in like a really close second. And I think if you're rewatching it through that lens, it comes up constantly. Obviously the kind of format of it is with this voiceover, and these new men are introduced every episode. They are introduced with like their name, their job title, and often like how much money they earn or how much money they've got, or what apartment they live in. Like it's really woven into the relationships and the like dating aspect of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to kind of set the scene, and we want to really look at the universe that Sex and the City exists in this conversation, it's worth us just diving in a little bit to the lifestyle that we see the main characters living, and Carrie in particular, whether her lifestyle actually is like this realistic depiction of what it might be like to be in your early 30s as a writer in New York in the 90s, or whether it was actually like total fantasy.
People cannot agree on this either. I've seen so much discourse from both sides. There's I think a BuzzFeed article that says that Carrie would have been over $1 million in debt by the end of the 6th series. And then there's also a couple of other articles, and particularly there's one on Substack by Evan Katz, I think, that is kind of refuting that and saying that actually Carrie Bradshaw's lifestyle was probably easily achievable for her. And so, I mean, I've got some numbers if we want to go into the real like details of it.
Yeah, I definitely think we should, because I think this is one of the things that comes up so often. And like, whenever we ask people online, what are your kind of money takeaways from Sex and the City, the first one that always comes up is the lifestyle was so unaffordable. And I have found it really interesting doing this kind of research and deep dive into it, because one of the things I think we maybe have forgotten or don't really appreciate is like what a different world writing was and journalism was back, 30 years ago, compared to now, where, it is so hard to make a living as a writer now, because we have the internet, we have AI, and as a career, writers are having to really diversify to make anything. But actually, it was a very different environment back then. And I know, you've got some of the numbers, but Candice Bushnell, the founder, the author of Sex and the City, talked about this as well, I think, in some interviews, and the fact that actually it wasn't totally unrealistic to her what Carrie would be earning and how she'd be living.
Yeah, and I think, we touched on this in Bridget Jones as well, didn't we? Because Shazza is a journalist, and managing to kind of live this quite sort of like upper middle class lifestyle in central London. And it's related to the internet, right? It's potentially like coming towards the end of that golden era of journalism where people were getting paid huge amounts to write kind of a column. And we don't know whether Carrie is salaried or whether she's freelance, but it doesn't really matter. The assumption is that she's getting paid around $1,000 a column. So that's $4,000 a month. And if her apartment is rent controlled, that would be around like $750. I think that's like the canon of how much she's paying.
I think that's what she actually says at one point, is that she's paying about that much.
Okay.
That is the one figure that I have seen like a few people drill into and say that even in a rent controlled apartment, you'd be looking at double that at the time that she was living on the Upper East Side. But we'll let her have that pass.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had read a couple of pieces as well where like money was a bit contentious in the writers' room. So potentially some of the younger female writers were maybe pushing to say this isn't that realistic. But we have to give a bit of license for creativity. And I think one of the things that comes up quite a lot in Sentimental in the City, which I have, of course, listened to like 3 or 4 times since it came out, which is the mini-series of Sentimental Garbage with Carolina Donahue and Dolly Alderton that you referenced earlier, is that people are like really judgmental of all of these characters' flaws, but without flawed characters, you don't have anything interesting happen. And if we had Carrie being like flat broke, staying on someone's sofa, she wouldn't be able to do anything. So we have to allow for like a bit of creative license.
We'd be watching somebody just sat in their house watching TV, eating baked beans on toast. Okay, just a quick pause for a word from our sponsor, eToro.
You know how in Sex and the City, the girls could talk about literally anything? Sex, breakups, babies, body hair, nothing was off limits.
They even talked about money sometimes, but weirdly not really investing or growing their wealth. Like, Why were they talking about their date's net worth, but never their own?
That's why we love eToro's Loud Investing initiative. It's about making investing a normal part of the group chat.
Not just a thing that men talk about while they're at golf.
We want money conversations to feel like brunch with your best mate. Honest, fun, maybe a little bit chaotic, but super helpful and real.
Exactly. And with eToro, investing feels social. You can learn from others and build confidence without pretending that you've read The Economist from cover to cover.
So if you've ever felt like the odd one out in money conversations, eToro is your invite to the table.
No shame, no jargon, just women investing loudly.
This episode of Help Me I'm Poor is sponsored by eToro. Search Loud Investing with eToro to find out more and join the movement.
And just so we're clear, everything we talk about here is for information and education only. It's not financial advice, personal recommendations, or an offer of any kind. Always do your own research.
eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down, and your capital is at risk. What's really interesting is that can sort of come full circle, and not to like jump ahead to and just like that, but one of the themes that I really want to get into there is like how sometimes it ruins TV when people have too much money as well. But yeah, that's for a future episode. But yeah, so she is looking at $750 for her rent-controlled apartment. She probably gets loads of freebies as a journalist.
Yeah.
She's not a fashion journalist, so we're assuming, and we sort of know that she's paying for her clothes herself because there's lots of references to her putting them on credit cards. Obviously, the amount that she spent on shoes becomes like this real big iconic figure later on. It's all that in itself is almost another character. But she's probably getting like free entry to places. So one of her best friends is an art dealer. So any gallery openings that she's going to, she's not paying for those. No. Samantha is a PR. She does a lot of restaurant and bar PR. Yeah. So she's probably getting free entry to all of that stuff. And it's really interesting because I've got a few journalist friends and a lot of them do treat like the freebies almost as a supplement to their salary because they're not getting paid that much for the actual writing. So they kind of see those things that they can get for free as being like money that they don't have to spend, and it's supplementing their income.
I think it should be seen like that as well in a way, because if you look at it in like other areas, like this is a really kind of random example, but I know that if you work for TfL, for example, you get free travel. So you don't pay for your Oyster card. So that's like several £100s a month that you're getting, which you'd have to spend otherwise. And in a way, it's the same thing if you're getting free drinks and free food. And Carrie's also like very well connected. So I imagine that she goes everywhere and knows like barmen and bar managers and like restaurant managers. So yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise at all.
It is. You're right. It's a bit like an employee discount. Like my house is fully furnished with stuff that I bought in like staff sales and with my staff discount when I work for an interiors company. It is, I think when you view it through that lens,
it's like a perk of the job.
Exactly. Yeah. But I would also say Carrie goes on a lot of dates, and I am assuming that she is not paying on lots of these dates, so, and that is part of her job as well. She's a sex and relationships columnist. So she might even have like a bit of a stipend from the paper for it. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, based on their kind of attitude to dating men, I can't imagine that she's paying anything towards these dates or even offering. I think one aspect as well that comes up when we're looking at the lifestyle of Carrie and also the other main characters and how unrealistic it is the fact that they never cook anything. And I do think this is one thing that stands out, especially watching it now, is, we know that like one way that you can very, very easily spend money, especially in 2025, is like constantly ordering Deliveroo or Uber Eats. And these characters literally don't cook. Like we know that Carrie uses her oven for storage. Yeah. That is one question. Like how much would you be spending if you every night got a takeaway? Like you're going to be spending what, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars each month.
I genuinely think that if Carrie is, because there are a few nights in the first series, like it becomes sort of increasingly more glamorous and they're always out as the series go on. But in the first series, they are quite often like at each other's apartments. But I think that Carrie's the one who everyone's like, oh, don't worry about putting in your bit towards the takeaway. She is like really the she's the scrappy one. The rest of them have kind of got their career and got their head screwed on. Charlotte certainly has like a real plan, which we'll talk about in a couple of episodes time. But yeah, the rest of them do seem like much more financially literate, I suppose, and much more in control of everything. And Carrie's whole thing is that she's a bit cutesy and she's a bit chaotic and all of that stuff. And I do think that extends to her finances. And I do think that sometimes in the friendship group, there is one friend where everyone's like, don't worry, I'll get this round. Or so I do also, it's a big leap, but I do wonder if she's being subsidized in some of those things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
By her friends. But there is also that sort of standout line of about buying Vogue instead of dinner because it fed me more, which just, I mean, okay. But
I like her commitment.
And, you know, if we're sort of talking about putting stuff out into the universe, she does end up working for Vogue. So who knows, maybe it was like an investment.
She does. And also that is a highly paid job. We then find out kind of looking into it. Actually, I think it was about $4,000 a month, the Vogue column. So
yeah, $4 a word she gets. But I think that's like in a later series and we can potentially look at that because it is a bit of a moment in the series. What about like the other characters? Kind of, I think the first series does a really good job of setting the scene of where they all are professionally, financially, all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of very briefly touched on it, but Miranda, we know from the start, is this high-powered attorney. She's a lawyer. She's very much like the career woman. She's got this kind of real boss vibe, but she works in a very male-dominated space. I think in a way that kind of pushes her even more to be so kind of assertive and successful. But we'll talk about it as we go through the season, but we know that she is in a good financial position. She's very stable. She's earning a lot of money. You know, if you're going to be a lawyer in New York City at, you know, any stage, whether you're in the 90s or now, you're going to be earning good money. And she works hard, but she will be being rewarded for it. So I think we know that her situation is not going to be scrappy and that she, you know, her financial situation does come up quite a lot as we kind of go through the series and does become a really interesting talking point, I think, because the way that it's perceived, I think her earning power is quite controversial, but I don't want to go into it in too much detail now.
Yeah, no, next episode, I think we can really, really go to town on Miranda's finances because you're right, she's so fascinating and a lot of her storylines are quite money-centric, but also like money in the way that we want to talk about it in terms of how it impacts like her life and her relationships and all of that. I think she makes partner in season 2, so she's on the verge of becoming a partner. She's not, you know, in corporate law, graduates are being paid sort of really well. But you know, she has worked her way up the ladder and she is on the verge of making partners. So I mean, there are lots of estimates out there. Some of them are really high, kind of $200,000 to $300,000 a year, which maybe for 1998 is pushing it, but I don't
think
know.
It is. No, I mean, like New York notoriously pays higher than London anyway for those types of jobs. So I reckon if she's that kind of level of seniority, she probably was taking home that kind of amount of money, which again, back to your point about Carrie kind of being a bit scrappy and often getting bailed out, I imagine like if you know you've got a friend in that situation and they're probably going to like just be like, oh, forget it if you forget to pay your Chinese takeaway quarter.
No, absolutely. And then they're kind of both the same age as is Charlotte. Charlotte, I think, is the one that we've got like the most backstory on in actual fact. Like no one knows about Carrie. She was born at 32 in New York. I think we hear like very little about her. We get a little bit about Miranda's parents as like tiny little drops. We don't know anything about Samantha's family, but Charlotte, we kind of know that she comes from is it like Greenwich, Connecticut, which is very upper class, wealthy.
Yeah.
She is an Ivy League princess. She mentions many times that she went to Smith, particularly in the like scene where her boyfriend has made a certain request of her.
Oh yeah.
And she's like, I can't do that. I went to Smith, which is very funny. She's working as an art dealer.
Yes.
So, and I think that speaks to something that's come up on the podcast before, which is that generational wealth affords you the chance to go and do a bit of like an airy fairy artsy fartsy job.
A job that's not going to pay you much money at all. Like it's a job that rich people do.
Absolutely. And also kind of it's quite a difficult world to get into. I'd imagine in New York,
like
getting into the art world is difficult. So potentially there's been some connections there as well. And that's not to say that she's not good at her job. I think there are many examples over the course of the series where Charlotte is so knowledgeable and passionate about art. And that's some of the moments when she's at her most like beautiful, I think, is when she's talking about some of her takes on art. And she has some interesting storylines where people want her to paint her a certain way. And
I do think that's a really important point though, that like two things can be true there, where you know, there can be people that are really good at their job, but the only reason that they're in that career is because they have the privilege to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Just because you have the privilege and the financial stability to be able to go into a certain job doesn't mean that you're not good at it.
Yeah.
It just means that there might also be people that could also be good at it that don't have the opportunity.
Exactly that. And, you know, we see Charlotte go on a really interesting journey with work later on, which is something that we'll cover. But, you know, in this first series, it's very much, she's very stable. She gives the impression of someone who is quite like financially literate and has like a plan as well. And she does factor her like partner's earning potential, etc., into who she's willing to go out with. And she's not shy about it either.
No, I think that's what's really interesting, is that I think like she has a plan, but not in the way that we often now think about having a financial plan. It's like her financial plan is largely like based around a man.
Absolutely.
Which is in itself a type of plan. And I do think maybe there are more people out there that still do think that, but just maybe don't vocalize it as much. Or maybe, I don't know, are we going back to a world where people are thinking, actually, maybe I should have a man as a financial plan?
I think there's been a resurgence, and I really can't wait to talk about this more, because there's been a few articles so far this year that I found really interesting and really like challenging to my own sort of millennial like girl boss, independent woman kind
Stand
of
on your own 2 feet.
Exactly.
What if I just want a quiet, easy life?
But I mean, her kind of almost antithesis is Samantha, who is a good bit older than these guys. I think she's pretty much 10 years older.
Yeah.
Kim Cattrall was 42 when they were shooting the first season, which, if you have watched recently the scene where she is drunk and she opens her coat to the doorman to show herself in like this beautiful lingerie. If I had looked like that at 18, I would be thrilled. I would be dining out on that still. But
fair play to her.
Yeah, absolutely. But she is like, she's a bit older. She's got her own PR firm. She's very much set up. She never really has any money stresses, but we do see her celebrate successes throughout the season.
I guess she is kind of like the girl boss.
Yeah, she is. I do think that she isn't, but I love Samantha as a girl boss because she's so empowered in terms of her career, and she's so empowered in terms of like her sexuality and stuff. But we, over the course of this series, we see like real vulnerability from her. Yeah. And I do love that. It's so interesting that we have these 4 women. The first series is really like an introduction to all of them and like establishing their characters. And we have some real key scenes for establishing who they are, where they are on their journey, what they want from life. And like a big part of that is their finances. Yeah. And so if we've got our like main 4.
Yes.
The main kind of thrust of the whole storylines is the men that they meet and go out with and reject, or who reject them, or who it fizzles out with, who they, you know, most of these men actually, especially in season 1, only last for like 1 episode or maximum 2. And the only kind of consistent one is obviously big. Skipper, I think we get like a couple of
Yeah.
times. But you know, the men are they're not disposable. And this is something that comes up in like a review that Carrie gets for her book later on, is about the men being disposable, but it's dating in the truest sense of the word, of like they're trying these guys on for size almost, and often finding like really hilarious flaws with them or like deal breakers. But an observation that I made is that you've got 4 incredibly beautiful women, and they are all so beautiful in like their own way, and a lot of the men that they go out with are mid at best. At very best.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting as well, because we just see, even from the start, their different attitudes as well to men. We know that from the start, you know, Charlotte is looking for like this love of her life. Like
Prince Charming.
Yeah, she wants Prince Charming. She wants the fairy tale. Like the lens through which she sees every man is like, are they a potential husband? And they're going to provide her with that stability and security. Whereas you then see kind of the others, particularly when we see, I guess, Samantha, but also there are some episodes with Carrie where they kind of just end up in these like ridiculous situations with these like 20-something-year-old men. For example, we see Carrie and Samantha both kind of dating those guys in their 20s, and Carrie meets Sam because Samantha's dating this client of hers, or it's somebody that's connected to a client. Yeah. And they're these like first kind of put across as these quite like edgy, fun, cool younger guys. And then actually it just turns into them being quite like grim.
Some of those relationships are just seen as a bit of fun, but you very rarely see Charlotte in a situation like that. Like she does have a couple of flings with really inappropriate people, like the movie star who like where she sort of just basically turns into a groupie over the course of the episode. But you wouldn't catch her. She's like very purposeful in who she chooses to go out with, and money's like a big factor in that. But I would say she's not a settler. No. She's not willing to settle for someone that she doesn't find attractive or that she finds boring or whatever just because they're rich. And she does actually have that lunch with like a lot of her sorority sisters who've gone down that path that Charlotte really wants, like the family and kids, but they have settled very early and like done it all in their 20s. And there is a part of Charlotte, I think, that wants the independence. You know, she's moved to New York City. She hasn't just stayed at home or moved
become
back
like the
home.
housewife like down the road from where she grew up.
Exactly. So there's a bit of that in her. And that bit does remain in her even as she sort of becomes like professional girlfriend and wife later on. But it's really interesting how sort of status and finance plays out in lots of these relationships.
Yeah. And the fourth one that we are going to touch on in much more detail next week is Miranda and her relationship journey. But like I said, we will get into that properly next week when we meet our kind of other main character with Miranda, Steve.
Yep, justice for Steve. You can hear all about my opinions on that next week. I think that's probably it. Like we've laid the groundwork really well in a way that I think that season 1 does. We all know these characters. Hopefully anyone who's listening does know and love them all despite their flaws. And as things unfold throughout the next few weeks of this podcast and the next sort of few series of the show, there's just so much juicy stuff. I don't know that there is another show where there is this much content and this many discussion points around women and money, which are so relevant still today, which is incredible given that this went out from 1998 to 2004.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And I cannot wait to get into Miranda next week.
No, I'm very excited. So we really hope that you have loved listening to this, and please do let us know your thoughts. Rate, review, subscribe. It all means the world. And let us know what your thoughts are really as well on Sex and the City, whether you love the characters, whether you don't, whether you feel like it was a realistic depiction at all. Our inbox is open, and drop us a DM at Help Me I'm Podcast.
And we have to let you know as well that we are on Substack now as well. We have got a companion newsletter, which we're so excited about because it means that we can drop in some of our like more topical takes on things that are going on in the news and in culture at the time. You know, we can post you links to some TikToks that we've seen and either love or hate. We can also just drop in stuff that maybe we couldn't squeeze into the podcast. So do come find us on Substack. Or we're in your inboxes every Sunday morning. So make us your slow Sunday morning scroll. And for the podcast, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.